There is no denying that Europe has become insanely trendy over the years. We're talking about European trips, European summer, and the trendiest one of them all lately, the European lifestyle. But if you're from the US and you've never been to Europe, you're probably wondering, is Europe what it's actually cracked up to be? Nowadays, Americans not only fantasize but glorify this European lifestyle. And if you're wondering why, it's because the American lifestyle is unfortunately catching up to most. And with the American dream leaving the chat, everyone's wondering, is Europe the best place to live next? In this video, I'm breaking down exactly why life in Europe is objectively better than in the US. And it's not just the healthcare. One of the biggest things I wanted to do once I got my college degree was to travel, and that's what eventually led me to Europe. And if you're new here, I'm Britt, an American who's been living in Spain for over 6 years, and I've been traveling in Europe for over 8. And in today's video, we're answering the question that everyone is wondering: is life actually better in the USA or is life better in Europe? Life is better in Europe, and I'll be explaining why in this video. There are many reasons why life is better in Europe, but the first thing that I want to start off with is that there is a big lack of quality of life in the United States, and people are noticing that now nowadays because of things like the internet. People are also traveling a lot more than they used to, and also because there's a rapid change in politics all over the world. The US is also a very young country, and it's important to note that because the system nowadays is broken, and it's broken especially for young people to succeed. And before I dive into why life is so much better in Europe than in the United States, I do just want to mention a few things about the United States. First, starting with wealth inequality is a huge problem in the United States, especially in 2025. And I think it's going to become even a bigger problem as the middle class starts to shrink and there starts to become more poverty or wealth. In the United States, I think that's going to be something that we see as time goes on, and that is due to having such a broken system. So everyone knows that the system in the US is broken, and let me tell you some reasons why. So to start off with, people have to know that the concept of accessible college in the United States is relatively new. And what I mean by this is that specifically 1944 to be exact, President Roosevelt passed a GI Bill, and what that did was basically make college education accessible for all Americans. So before the GI Bill was passed, college in the US was for the elite and for the wealthy. So of course the GI Bill was a fantastic thing, especially for all generations to come, but it was exceptionally great for baby boomers. So what happened is the baby boomers, they went to college, they got a degree, they got a great job with an exceptional salary, and they were able to provide and have a nice quality of life throughout their lifetime. Now, the problem is that college tuition has basically become unattainable for the average American over the years. So what happens as a result is that the average American gets into debt just to go to college. And of course, getting into college loan debt wouldn't be such an issue if jobs were able to catch up with inflation and pay sufficient salaries. Unfortunately, most jobs don't, and that affects a lot of people's financial well-being, as well as having a family in the United States. If you have to pay for childcare or daycare, that is very expensive, and that is also something that is very unattainable for the average American. These are other factors of why people get into debt, and these are other factors that definitely affect Americans' quality of life. Now, with that being said, I think the first reason why life is so much better in Europe than it is in the US is because you're not so financially imprisoned in Europe as you are in the States. And when I'm referring to being financially imprisoned in the US, I'm referring to things like student debt, expensive healthcare, expensive car payments, expensive childcare, and a very expensive cost of living. And this is exactly what causes most Americans to be on this vicious hamster wheel of paying off this debt. And it's also super important to know, if you're not American, that this debt rat race isn't always just individual mismanagement. I think it's a systemic issue in the US that's rooted in an economic model that basically offloads the risk and cost onto individuals and families, and especially those without wealth. Many Americans are still doing what they've been told will lead to success, such as education, home ownership, etc. But the economic and policy structures often work against them in the US. In my opinion, I think it's a terrible setup, but the system in America is not made for the middle class to win. And I think that's something that most people see by now. All right, and I think the next reason why life is so much better in Europe than it is in the US is because wealth inequality isn't as bad in Europe as it is in the US. Wealth inequality is definitely a problem all over the world, but it's a huge issue in the US because it's among the highest in the developed world. This means it's that much harder to get ahead for the lower and middle class in the US. The next reason why I think life is so much better in Europe than it is in the US is because I think life is a lot fairer in Europe. In my opinion, I think Europe has a very group mentality, so it's a mentality of let's all get ahead together, or how can we all progress together. In comparison, in the US, it is not like that. It's very individualistic, and it's more like, how can I get ahead for myself? How can I look out for myself? And sometimes some people are ruthless with this, and sometimes people do a lot of things that are not good just to get ahead, such as lie, cheat, and steal. And I think people in Europe are a lot more by the book. Like, people follow the rules a lot more in Europe than they do in the US. And I'm not sure if because people in the US are a lot of the times on survival mode, and it's like, I need to do what I need to do just to kind of stay alive and stay afloat. So yeah, food for thought. And the next reason why I think life is so much better in Europe than it is in the US is because Europe treats people differently. And what I mean by this is you just don't see the level of homelessness that's become normal in American cities in Europe. And in my opinion, I don't think this is because Europeans are more giving necessarily. I think this is because in Europe, there are many government and public systems that actually work. Ultimately, in most European countries, housing is a basic right, and it's not just a business. Meanwhile, in the US, housing is a business, and if you can't afford it, too bad. Unfortunately, in the US, many people are only one financial emergency away from a financial ruin. I think it's impressive what a lot of countries in Europe have been able to do in regards to homelessness, because the systems are so effective that they're able to provide safety nets to prevent people from even ending up being homeless in the first place. You don't see this in the US. In fact, you see the contrary. So you see a lot of homeless people, especially in big cities such as New York City, San Francisco, and even Los Angeles too. I think the severity of the homelessness situation in the US is definitely something that surprises Europeans who visit the US for the first time, especially if you're used to seeing these big American cities in things like movies and TV shows. And then when you finally get there, you're seeing homeless people and maybe a lot of garbage all over the place. So it's definitely something that could be very shocking to people who travel to the US for the first time, because the homelessness situation is very bad in the US. And I personally think it's only going to get worse. And the next thing that I want to talk about, why life is so much better in Europe than it is in the US, is all about urban planning and infrastructure. The first time I ever came to Europe in 2017, I was honestly so impressed and so mind blown that there was a supermarket on every other street, if not every street. If you're not too familiar with the US and the way life is there in the sense of urban planning, I'll let you know a little bit that the US was made around the car, so you need the vehicle to get anywhere. I've traveled to around 15 European countries, and I've noticed that within all of them, the urban planning is exceptionally great. So we're talking about everything you need within walking distance, and if it's not within walking distance, you have very affordable public transportation to get you from point A to point B. Another thing that I also love about European cities and the urban planning of Europe is that the cities are structured in a very strategic way for this reason, so people have an easy way to get around. The US, it's very difficult to get around. Even if you live in a big American city, things are very spread out that you might even have to take the metro or take an Uber to go to your nearest supermarket. Another thing that's really cool about the urban planning in many European cities is that there's a lot of walking zones, meaning that cars can't drive through that area. So that's really good, especially in regards to clean air, because it helps with pollution and essentially with what you're breathing in too. And now let's talk infrastructure, because when I went to Europe for the first time, it honestly blew my mind how far ahead Europe is in regards to infrastructure. I'm talking about in most European countries, the roads are super smooth, the public transportation is clean and on time, and you can literally cross countries by train. You don't need a car, you don't have all that chaos and stress. It's actually no problem to get around. Meanwhile, in the US, you have potholes that wreck your car and you have to make those car payments and you have to pay for that car maintenance. God forbid anything happens to your car when you're driving through any of those potholes. And I think the biggest difference in regards to infrastructure in Europe is that in Europe, they invest and they maintain and they also modernize. On the other hand, the US lets things rot until they fall apart. I don't think I'll ever understand why the US, which is one of the wealthiest countries in the world, has road potholes the size of craters and doesn't even have efficient public transportation nationwide. And the last few things I want to talk about in regards to infrastructure in Europe is that when infrastructure is done right, it can change lives because infrastructure affects your everyday life. So let's say you live in a country where the public transportation is fantastic. You therefore don't need to own a car. That can save you thousands. Next, if the roads are smooth and you do happen to own a car, your car will last you a lot longer and you will save a lot more money on car maintenance. And lastly, if you're living in a city that's walkable, you feel safer, healthier, and even more connected. And this is why life is so much better in Europe compared to the US, because in the US, there's very poor infrastructure and that leads to a lot of stress, especially if you have a car, because you're usually stuck in traffic getting from point A to point B. You're spending a lot of money on your car payments. You're also spending a lot of money on car maintenance. And all in all, it's more expensive, which leads to more stress. And the next reason why I think life is so much better in Europe is all about health and the quality of food here. So what's really nice about the food prices in Europe is that it's accessible and it's affordable. In the States, I feel like getting good food and good quality of food, especially if you want to buy things like organic produce, it can get really expensive really quick. Also, there's a lot of foods that are allowed in the US that are actually banned in Europe, and I think that just goes to show food quality in Europe and the strong food standards here. On the contrary, I feel like the FDA does not do much to protect the food quality in the US, and it definitely shows, especially with things like pesticides. And the next reason why I think living in Europe is so much better than living in the US is because of safety. For the most part, Europe is very safe, and it's definitely a lot safer than the US. Piggybacking off of safety, I sometimes wonder and think that vulnerable people are at risk in the US. So vulnerable people, in my opinion, include people that are immigrants, children, women, and people who are also disabled. In my opinion, I don't feel like people that are in this demographic are always defended and always protected in the US. But in Europe, I do feel like these people are a lot safer. And the last reason why I think life is so much better in Europe than the US is all about accessibility. In Europe, you have access to so much and you don't have to be a millionaire to access it. In the contrary, in the US, you have to be wealthy to access things like travel, to access things like college tuition and not have to be stressed out about it for the rest of your life. Even quality of food, sometimes that can add up, and there's weird trends in the US like Erewhon or whatever it's called. I don't know how you pronounce that. I'm not really too interested in that trend, but there's like smoothies for $30. Like, why would I go there? Even if I was rich, that's just stupid to spend that much on a smoothie, in my opinion, if you ask me. But lo and behold, the US is the land of consumption and is the land of marketing consumption. So these are the trends that you see in the US. All in all, why I think life in Europe is so good in comparison to the US is because Europe is for the people and the US is for the individual. So if you're an American thinking about where to move abroad, I highly recommend checking out a European country if you're interested in quality of life. It will definitely not disappoint. Europe offers tremendous quality of life, delicious food, easy travel, and you're also not too far from the US. Like if you choose somewhere in Asia or Australia, you're even farther. And before I end this video, I did just want to say this is exactly why travel is so powerful. Because when you travel, you're not just visiting new places, you're also coming back to your home country and you're looking at it with different eyes. So if you're curious, skeptical, or even bored, I highly recommend to travel. Even if it's for a little bit, because everyone deserves to see what life could feel like somewhere else. And that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed learning about why why I think life is so much better in Europe than it is in the US. If you're curious about Europe, feel free to come visit and take a trip. I always think that real life experience is always best, and there's so many different countries to choose from, so feel free to take your pick. And outside of that, feel free to check out my latest videos if you're in the early process of moving abroad, because I have a ton of moving abroad tips and tricks waiting for you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Ciao.